Okay, so let's continue with our next video in our practice exam questions for AWS Certified Developer Associate exam. Okay, so let's read question number 71. A company is running an application on ECS. So ECS is one of the service where you can run the containers. So your company is running some application on ECS. When the company deploys a new version of the application, the company initially needs to expose 10% of the live traffic to the new version. So looks like company is trying to deploy a new version. So generally what will happen when you try to deploy a new version, it is going to override the old version. So if it is going to override the old version, whatever the current consumers or users is using your existing application, they might face some downtime. So there are some different deployment approach to avoid this. So when the company needs deploys a new version of the application, what the company wants is initially needs to expose 10% of the live traffic to new version. So what company wants, maybe just like when they deploy the new version, just 10% of the live traffic of the new version to the consumer, and basically 10% of the request will be from there and 90% from the remaining old one. After a period of time, the company needs an immediate route all the remaining live traffic to the new version. And after a period of time, company needs to immediately route all the remaining live traffic to the new version. Which ECS deployment should company meet? So rolling update is something you updates in some batches. Blue green. So blue green means one blue is your old version, green is your new version. So you can deploy something to when you deploy new application, that will become your green or maybe some another container instance, but old will still exist, right? So and slowly user will shift from blue to green, and but blue green with canary. So when you say canary, in the canary what will happen, we will initially deploy 10% to 20% traffic, like when you deploy the some application, a new application or new version, that is called as a green instance, and old will still exist, old is not going to be deleted, old is still exist. And and we are going to shift 10% of the traffic to the new version. And once all the 10% has been done, then we are going to shift the remaining 90%. That is called a canary. Blue green with all at once. So this is all at once, like when you deploy the new version, that is called as a green. You are going to shift all the user. Let's suppose there are 100 user who are using your older application, or shift all the 100 user at once. Blue green with linear means like first you shift 10%, then 20%, then 30%, then 40%, like linear, in the linear fashion. But the question says we need to initially expose 10%, and then we need to remaining all. So in the linear we have 10, 20, 30%, it is not remaining at once. It's not like first 10 or then 90. Canary is the correct answer, so B is the correct answer. Question number 72. A microservice application is deployed across multiple containers in ECS. Again, question for the ECS. So you are a microservice application, which is deploys across multiple containers. So now this time it is running in multiple containers, because this is a microservice. So microservice is like your application is running as part of the microservice. There could be multiple microservice, and multiple microservice. Let's suppose five, and five ECS container is running. To improve performance, developer wants to capture trace information between the microservice. Maybe because one microservice is trying to connect with the another second one is trying to connect with the first one is connected to third one is connected to the fourth one. All right. So developer want to capture the trace information between the, basically to improve performance. They want to improve the performance, like which application or which microservice is causing delay, or whose performance is not better. So how we are going to know? Until unless we will not going to trace that, okay, which application is taking much time or which application is like running very fast. So we have to first capture the trace, and then visualize the microservice architecture. So as soon as you could see, okay, we have to see the performance. All right. So immediately something related to the X-ray should come into your picture. Okay, let's see that. Build the container from the Amazon AWS X-ray daemon base image use the AWS X-ray SDK to instrument that application. This can be the correct answer. They said because on the ECS we run the container. They said when you run the container, the base image should be a major X-ray daemon, so that the daemon will be run automatically. And then because your application should use AWS X-ray SDK, because they has to send the performance metrics to the X-ray. So anyhow, they have to use the X-ray SDK. So this is one of the option. Install the Amazon CloudWatch agent on container image. A CloudWatch agent is just to monitor the metrics or logs, nothing like that. You can't uh, check inter microservice. So this looks wrong. Install the AWS X-ray daemon at each of the instance. So this is also X-ray, but it is mentioned install. So you have to manually install. And ECS, when you run the ECS container, it can be of two category. One is like EC2 type, one is Fargate. If it is serverless, right, then you can't install the X-ray daemon, right? Uh, if it is EC2, then you can install the X-ray daemon. But in the question, it is not mentioned. So this is partially correct. Configure CloudTrail events. CloudTrail can capture okay which microservice hit which API, but they can't monitor the performance, right? So A will be the correct answer, even though C can be also the correct answer. But if in the question it is mentioned we are running especially EC2, then directly install we can say C will be the correct answer. But in the question it is not mentioned whether it's Fargate or or EC2 type, then we can use a base image of X-ray, and then our application will use the X-ray SDK. But anyhow, this is also like even if we consider Fargate, this is still incomplete because anyhow we have to install the X-ray, but our application should also be configured using the X-ray SDK. All right, so A will be the correct answer. Question number 73. A company is planning to use code deploy to an ECS. So similarly, we are doing some deployment to the ECS. During the deployment, a new version of the application, the company initially must expose only 10% of the live traffic. Then after 15 minutes, company must route all the remaining traffic. So it's same question which we have just covered. So whenever we have to shift only 10% and then remaining, it is called as the canary deployment, right? So let's look at the option. So now they said first we need to deploy 10%, but after 15 minutes we have to deploy the remaining live traffic. So it should be the canary. Let's see what is the canary. So canary is this option, and this option. This is the linear, which is wrong. But the B and C, they said lambda canary. But our application is only on ECS, so it should be ECS canary. ECS canary 10% and 15 minutes. So A will be the correct answer. Question number 74. A developer noticed timeout from the AWS CLI when the developer run list command. So you are a developer and you are running some CLI commands to list something, maybe list the files from the S3 bucket or content from the DynamoDB table. What should the developer do about this time? But they are getting timeout. So when they generally get the timeout, if the data is huge and you are trying to get all the data, because here the developer is not facing the access issue, so you can't say it's the IAM permission. Here the developer said timeout issue, the request is going, but when trying to fetch, it is getting timeout because the data might be large. All right, so what you have to do, so when you are running some command, you can use the page size parameter to request the data in small number of item. Use the shorthand syntax. And this looks wrong. When you run the AWS CLI command, it doesn't matter whether you use a shorthand syntax or long syntax. Shorthand syntax means like minus minus a, or minus minus append is the long, minus minus a is the shorthand syntax. Use the YAML stream output, no. Use a quotation mark, no. So basically you can use the page size parameter because you are running timeout only when you are going to retrieve huge number of data. So you can use the hyphen page size parameter to request a small number of data, so that you as a developer should not face the timeout. So A will be the correct answer. Question number 75. A company has moved a legacy on-premise application to AWS. by performing a lift and shift. So earlier they were running some application on premises. Now they moved to the AWS. Uh, the application exposes a REST API, and this application is basically providing some REST APIs to the users. The company exposes a REST API that can be used to retrieve billing information. Okay, that like some API retrieve the weather information. This API retrieve the billing information. The application is running on an Amazon EC2. Okay, so they lift and shift to the EC2 instance. The application code cannot support concurrent invocation. Okay, so let's suppose if you are if someone is going to invoke the REST API parallelly multiple times. All right. So application is not going to support only one call at a time. Application code cannot support concurrent invocation. Many client access the API, but in our case, what will happen because the code is designed in such a way, right? So it is not. But how the user know? User don't know whether your code is not capable of handling multiple requests. So what client will do? Many clients are going to access this REST API, and the company adds new clients all the time, and they are also adding the new clients all the time. The developer is concerned that the application might become overwhelmed by too many requests because there are so many clients. Along with that, we are adding the new clients day by day. So they thought maybe it is getting overwhelmed, right? So too many requests will come. The developer needs to limit the number of requests to the API. So they said, okay, what we will do, because we can't modify the code right now because it's a restriction, you can say. We already mentioned you can't say no, no, let's modify the code to allow the concurrent invocation. No. So they said the developer wants to limit the number of requests so that from the client itself, whenever the request is going to become, it limits that, limit the number of requests for all the current and the future clients. So whatever the new clients which we are adding, even for those, and whatever the existing clients, even for those as well. For all those clients, we can restrict the number of limit. Okay, you can only trigger this number of requests. You can only trigger this number of requests. The developer must not change the API. So it's already mentioned they should not change the API and the code. Sorry. What should the developer do to meet this requirement? Place the API behind Amazon API gateway. Set the server-side throttling limits. So this looks correct because anyhow, when you expose the REST API, so one option is using the Amazon API gateway, right? And now you have to limit the request. So you can limit the request somewhere in the API. Place in the network load balancer wrong, application load balancer wrong. Place an API behind the Amazon API gateway. So this looks correct. Set the per client throttling limit. So this looks wrong because they said set the per client throttling limits, but the question said it should be for the current and the future client. What about the already clients which are like using those API, and along with that, from time to time, new clients are going to become. So they said set the server side throttling limits. Right, because our application can't support the current invocation. It doesn't mean okay, this client can access 10 and maybe 1,000 client will come. So 10 into 1,000 is so many or 100K. So we can set the server side. The application can only handle like this limit. So probably the A will be the correct answer. Some people say D as well. So let's go to the uh, so they said also A. So since all current has to be limited same, limit the number of requests to the API for all current and future client. So most of the people said A only. Some people said D, but whoever said D, they did not provide the correct. Okay, he said the API gateway provide four basic type of throttling. AWS throttling limits are applied across all accounts and clients. Pre-account limits per API per client throttling limits are applied to the client that use API case. But no one has upvoted that. Okay, so he gives some documentation link. Let's open that. Throttle request to your REST API for better throughput in API gateway. Okay. So basically, client will get okay too many request error. Okay, so what are the different ways how throttling limits are applied? So per account limits, per API, per client throttling limits are applied to clients that use API keys associated with your user's plane as client identifier. Note that these limits can't be higher than the per account limits. Okay, account level, configure API level, configure stage level. I think probably will be the A will be the correct answer. Server side because they have mentioned for all the current and the future clients. Uh, right. But anyhow, still like because 50% of the people say D, but looks to me A. If you know the correct answer, you can let me know. Question number 76. An e-commerce company wants to redirect users to a country specific website when they enter example.com. So as an example, when they enter example.com, if the user is from United States, so they will redirect to example.com/US. If the user is from French, they will redirect to example.com/FR. The web application using Amazon CloudFront and application load balancer and ECS cluster. The application domain name resolution is configured in Amazon Route 53. What solution will meet this requirement with the least configuration effort? So what we have to do, update the routing policy. Routing policy means right Route 53 policy for the application Route 53 for the geolocation routing. Configure listener rule based on the unique alias location to redirect request to the correct URL by country. Okay. Correct URL by country is okay because in the route 53, how you can route is if you have to route example.com, then you can route to us.example.com, fr.example.com. But in this question, we have to redirect to example.com/us. Basically, there is some different folder called /us/fr. We have to route to that. So route 53 routing is not going to be work here. Create a CloudFront function because it's using CloudFront. So they said, let's create some Lambda edge function to inspect the CloudFront country. So whoever user will come, we will inspect the country from the header and then redirect the response to the different URL, which is fine. Different URL means /us/French on user location. This can be the correct. On the ECS web server application, use a geo IP database to look up the request IP address. So this can also be correct, but this is very complicated. You have to maintain the database. Use AWS WF to determine the country of region. Create an AWS WF custom with the geography. No. So B looks correct to me because even maybe some people will say A as well because say geolocation routing, some kind of this kind of keyword. But if that will be the if the question say us.example.com, fr.example.com, then the A will be the correct. But here uh, the URL is different. Example.com/us. Basically, the path is different. So you need to route the different path. Then B will be the correct answer. Question number 77. A developer deploys an AWS Lambda function that runs each time when an S3 bucket has been created. So as an S3 bucket has been created, Lambda has been done. The Lambda function is supposed to attach an S3 life cycle policy to S3 bucket. So whenever S3 bucket has been created, a Lambda has been run and the Lambda is going to add the life cycle policy to the newly created S3 bucket. The developer discovered that the newly S3 created bucket have no S3 live policy attached. So which AWS service should the developer use to possibly find the error? So Lambda is getting trigger, but our we are expecting that the it should attach the lifecycle policy to the S3. It is not getting attached. So which what is the first point? You should check the Lambda logs, right? So you should check the Amazon CloudWatch and check the Lambda logs. CloudFormation no, S3 no, CloudTrail no. CloudTrail is just like the whether the API has been hit or not. But that you can also check from the CloudWatch. Even you want more like whether the code has been failed or not. So D is the correct answer. A developer has created a web API that uses ECS and load balancer. An Amazon CloudFront distribution uses the API as an origin of web cloud. So CloudFront, in the CloudFront, there could be multiple origin. S3 as an origin, API as an origin. So in the CloudFront, API as an origin, like which API? This web API, which is running on your ECS and behind the load balancer. The application has received million of requests with the JWT. So application is getting so many requests with JWT that is not valid in the authorization header. The developer has scaled out the application to handle the unauthenticated request. What should the developer do to reduce the number of unauthenticated requests to the API? Add a request routing route to the ALB to return 401. Okay. Add a container to the ECS task definition to validate JWT. Set a new container. Totally wrong and not wrong. More complicated. They said your application is running in one ECS, and let's spin up a new container, and with the new code, and that code is just to validate the JWT. But here we have to reduce the number of authentication requests. Even we are going to do that, and if that failed, then we are not going to move to the actual application, but unnecessary complicated and more cost. Create a CloudFront function that for the distribution use a crypto module for the function to validate the JWT. This can be the correct answer because we are going to filter on the CloudFront itself, because we have the CloudFront, and you can create a edge function, and as soon as the request is going to become, we can validate the JWT. Add a custom authorizer for the AWS Lambda for the CloudFront distribution to validate the JWT. No, wrong, because in the CloudFront, the batteries use the CloudFront function rather than the custom authorization to validate the JWT. First is add a routing route for the LB to return a 401 status code if the authorization header is missing. So this is also not like looks correct, but C looks correct. Question number 79. A developer is creating a mobile application that will not require to user login. What is the most efficient way? So there is a authentic like sign up facility there also, but if people don't want to sign it, but still they can access the mobile application. So how you are going to approach that? So whenever you could see login logout, Amazon Cognito service should come into your picture. Use an identity provider to securely authenticate. No, we don't want to authenticate. We want the users uh, like who can't log in or without login they can access. Use an AWS Lambda function? No. Create credential? No. Use Amazon Cognito to associate unauthenticated user. That's correct. So they said because in the Cognito we can like there is a function, there is a like options called, do you want to allow the unauthenticated user to access your application? So you can use that, and for that you can maybe assign some IAM role so that the limited part of your mobile application has been visible. So D will be the correct answer. Question number 80. A developer has created an AWS Lambda function that use 15 MB of memory. Okay. When the developer runs the code natively on laptop, which has 4 cores, the function runs in 100 MB. So Lambda uses 15 MB memory, and when the developer run locally, which has 4 cores, the function run 100 millisecond. But when the developer deploys the Lambda code with 128 MB memory, so memory is not an issue because developer already know it's using 128 15 MB, and when he created the Lambda, he created 128 MB. But it took 3 seconds, so 3 seconds is more than the 100 millisecond. Subsequent run takes even like takes more than 500 millisecond. Okay, first run take 3 seconds, and when he retry again and again and again, then they looks okay 500 or maybe more than 500 millisecond, but still not 100 millisecond. The developer need to improve the performance of the Lambda function so that the function run consistently in less than 100 millisecond, excluding the initial startup time. So this 100 millisecond is only the function execution time. They said just ignore the time when the function is going to take for the startup time. How should the developer do? Increase the reserved concurrency. No, reserved concurrency is like how many Lambda function can be triggered at a time. No, increase the provision concurrency. We can do that, but in the question it is also provision concurrency is like how much time it is going to take during the startup. But already they have like told we have to exclude the initial startup time. So there is no need to change the provision. Increase the memory. Now you can say why should we increase the memory when we already allocate 128 MB? Because the developer when they are running they have running on 4 cores, but maybe when it is running on 120 MB they, maybe it is using one core. So the more the memory more the CPU. So basically for the CPU, and you can't, because it is serverless, you can't directly increase the CPU, you have to increase the memory. So C can be the correct answer. Repackage the lambda function as a container, no. So C will be the correct answer. So that's it. That's the end of the video, and thank you.